dramatically and stuff like that. So what I'm trying to do is to test the idea that the problem with financial services today is not the technology, it's actually the way the business itself is constructed, the idea of institutions as a business. And so the reason we invited you was to explore the idea of what institutions look like in a shared economy.
Yes.
Okay, so and so we want to sort of get an essence of what's it been like building Wikipedia in the foundation and all that, and what can traditionally constructed businesses look like if they took their cues from you and what you've been learning in the process. Okay, I'm going to just introduce you very quickly. Very pleased to be able to speak to Jimmy Wales, the founder of Wikipedia, that huge library or encyclopedia which has 5.8 million articles now and growing at about 570 articles every day, 270 languages, a whole new business model. Just talk us through a little bit about the early days of Wikipedia, what it took to kickstart the idea of a collaborative momentum. Now, I ask this with a little bit of evil in my mind because when we think about Alibaba, for example, Jack Ma says that in order to get Alibaba going, the first 100 transactions were fake. They actually had to buy back the goods that were being displayed on their website. So there's this whole thing about starting a business, a collaborative momentum, as it were. What was it like with Wikipedia?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is remember that it's 5.8 million in English, but globally there's more than 50 million entries, and so we're in hundreds of languages and so forth. So that's a big place to be today, but of course, in the very beginning it was very small. People always ask what were the first articles in Wikipedia, and the truth is some of the early article history was lost, so we're not exactly sure, but I do know what the first words were. The first words in Wikipedia were "Hello World," because I know because I wrote them myself. When I had installed the software and I was testing, I just typed "Hello World" to see if it would work. In the early days, what was interesting about Wikipedia is that we had a prior project which was not successful called Newpedia, which was the same vision, a free encyclopedia for everyone. But I didn't really understand how to build online communities. I didn't understand what communities needed, and so we had designed a very top-down, very old-fashioned system that didn't work. It didn't allow people to flourish and to do good things. It lacked trust in the users. So once I launched Wikipedia, we got more work done in 2 weeks than in almost 2 years. And we had a core community of a couple hundred people who immediately turned in and started building and growing things.
Was that core community, was it constructed, or were they, was it incentive? I mean, like it was.
There were no. The only incentive was to share knowledge.
Okay.
I think because we had, with the Newpedia project, we had gathered a group of volunteers for a couple of years to discuss how could we create an encyclopedia and to think through what does it mean to be neutral and so on. So once we got the software ready, people were really ready to get started working. And so that core initial group was a small number of people, but it started to grow very, very quickly, in part because it was really fulfilling a gap in the marketplace at the time. People really, you can tell now they love Wikipedia, and it's one of the most popular websites in the world. They really wanted a concise summary of human knowledge, and so it grew very, very quickly. And in the early days, I remember I used to create a report that the community could look at, and it was called What Google Likes. So I would look into the server logs and see what was Google sending traffic to see what was popular on the site, but also what kind of searches were people searching for and finding us. And so people would find things like, oh wow, so anything relating to World War II, for example, is always a popular topic in history. And they would say, oh, well, look, this is World War II things are popular, let's build more World War II things. Or they would say, oh, we see that, we have 5 of the 9 planets.
Yeah.
Well, there were 9 back then, I guess 8
right,
now.
Yeah, and back to 9 again. So it's like,
And so, they were eager to grow, and it was interesting because it was a group of volunteers, but they took very seriously the idea of if we wanted to be successful, we needed to write things that people found interesting.
Okay, so that was one. And how much of it was technology, as in
Almost none, almost no technology.
the Wikipedia, the wiki,
Yeah, so the concept of wiki, meaning a website that anyone can edit, had actually been around for about 6 years. There's a great programmer, lovely guy called Ward Cunningham who invented wiki back in 1995. And then in 2001 is when I started Wikipedia and tried to apply the wiki idea of this really open editing system to the encyclopedia. But of course, even today, the amount of technology involved in Wikipedia is really very tiny. We have very minimal use of algorithms and things like that. There's a little bit, but even what little bit we have is mostly supportive and experimental more than anything.
So then, what went wrong with Wiki Tribune?
Nothing's gone wrong with Wiki Tribune.
Okay,
Yeah.
in that here you were taking it one more notch in that you're covering news and credible news. So and participatory news. It's almost like street journalism online. But you did have a setback in that the formal editing process was not able to capture.
Sure. So I mean, basically what I talk about is actually kind of amusing. Is before Wikipedia, I had the project called Newpedia, which was very top-down, editor-in-chief, people reviewing things, and nothing could get published until I went through this process. Then I started Wiki Tribune, and I made the same mistake again. I hired a very senior editor. It was a review process, and the problem with that model is that it's very intimidating for volunteers. You're going to submit your work to a very senior editor who's going to judge whether it's good or not. It's very hard for people as opposed to collaborating in a community. But I still think that pure citizen journalism is not enough, that citizens can do a lot in the area of journalism and can produce quality work. We see this at Wikipedia, but you actually do need professional journalists, although you need them for different things than what a lot of journalists think. A lot of journalists think that ordinary people don't have good news judgment, but I think sometimes they have better news judgment because they know what they're actually interested in, not what chases clicks. But they're not good at going out and doing interviews. They may be a little shy about that. They're really good at desk research. And so we're feeling our way forward. And right now we're in a mode of building that community, giving them the power, like really going wiki and saying, let's figure this out together. And it's working. The community's growing. We're continually updating the software. And
so would it grow as quickly as Wikipedia did, or has it got to?
Very hard to say. I mean, of course I would dream of that, but I don't think it's very likely. Although, remember, Wikipedia grew quickly, but not as quickly as certain things like Facebook, which is much younger than Wikipedia. It is a process of time involving community. When you have genuine community, where people are meeting each other and learning to trust each other and learning to judge each other's work and so on, it takes time for those friendships and those bonds.
So in the time that you've been building Wikipedia, who did you leave behind? Who are your peers, and who's running faster than you? Like, how do you pace yourself?
I don't know. It's a funny thing because at Wikipedia, like my way of doing things has always been, I don't think about competition. At Wikipedia, and in fact in all of my work, I try to do things I think are interesting, and then if other people like them, I think that's great. I'm happy if they like them. But we don't think about competitors, we don't think about being ahead or behind other people, and so on. In some ways, Wikipedia is so unique.
Right. But at the same time, Google, stands a chance to overshadow Wikipedia if they structured their content a lot more, in an organized way,
I don't
although every Google
that.
search brings you back to Wikipedia, but
Yeah. I don't really worry about that. I mean, the thing about it is, to do what we do, it really requires this kind of spirit of community, and it's very hard for any other organization to replicate that. And I don't know. I just don't think in those terms. And if they do, and they do a better job than we do, I think that's great. They should deserve to win. But there seems to be very little chance of that. Google has no interest in trying to do what we do. I mean, for one thing, it's a terrible business. So,
right.
Why not just let us do it?
Okay. Let me just zero in on this. The commercial process. Why didn't it lure you? Why didn't it tempt you?
Well, I do have the for-profit site, Wikia, which is now being rebranded as Fandom, which is a series of fan wikis, so Game of Thrones wiki, House of Cards wiki, Fortnite wiki, all of those wikis. And those are advertising supported, and it's a very successful company. It's about number 20 on the internet. Very happy with that. And so people shouldn't worry about me. I'm not going to starve. But for Wikipedia, I just think it's a very special place. My vision for Wikipedia has always been for it to be like a temple for the mind, a very high quality place, a place to go think and learn and reflect. And I think it's important for our mission that Wikipedia is driven fundamentally by supporting the community to share knowledge rather than fundamentally looking at ad revenue or page views or metrics like that, which I think would distract us and lead us down a bad path. I mean, there are a lot of companies, a lot of internet companies, Google and Facebook, who do think of themselves as being very global, and they are focused on every person on the planet. But in terms of their actual commercial investments, obviously they make a lot more investments in getting the next million viewers in California than the next million viewers in Nigeria, simply because the ad revenue is so much better.
Right, and then it becomes screwed up that way. I mean, it was screwed in whichever direction.
So although I think they do a good job for idealistic reasons of supporting smaller languages and things like that, and so I applaud them for that, it's not fundamental to their mission in a way that at Wikipedia it is fundamental to our mission.
When I think about businesses that have taken over these collaborative platforms, GitHub was bought by Microsoft recently. Is it inevitable that once you have that ecosystem that someone commercial is going to be interested in you?
I don't know, maybe. I don't know. Again, I don't think so much about commercial versus non-commercial, and I don't find that problematic. I mean, if Microsoft does a good job of running GitHub has never been a charity. It's never been a idealistic place. It's a tool, a very useful tool, with a big community around it, and that's fantastic. There's lots of ways they could screw that up. They would be foolish if they did, but companies make mistakes all the time. But I think it's hard to say.
Yeah. So the reason I'm very impressed and very intrigued by what you've built is that you stand on one extreme of the continuum from commercialization and community. And today you have a whole range of institutions, banking, finance, which is where I come from, large institutions trying to harness the digital to survive. But they have thousands of employees, they have thousands of processes, they have an institutionalized approach, and on top of that, they're product centric. They have something to sell. Whereas you are now the benchmark on the other extreme, saying that there's a world where you create a community, you create something that is commercially viable, and yet it's it's collaborative in that sense. And in the middle, all these other elements, like you've got APIs, for example. Should APIs be institution-centric or community-centric? In other words, it's driven by the user,
yes.
Rather than the producer. It's user-driven rather than provider-driven in that sense. Where are you in your thinking about commercialization and building an institution? Do you think that we are now heading to a world where the formal institutional structure is not able to carry the digital,
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that a lot of organizations need to think about is how transforming the business to be more open can benefit you in ways that are very difficult to predict and be very surprising. So the idea of, let's say you've got some sort of an API to interact with a financial service or something like this. Well, generally speaking, most banks, for example, they don't really open up those APIs to third parties in a very minimal way with very heavyweight partnerships. But you can imagine if someone said, look, well, here's the API, here's the login protocol. They become as open as a lot of other traditional internet services. And then people can build apps on top of that and build interesting things on top of that. I mean, a lot of that is happening, of course. But I think oftentimes it's happening in a very, very narrow kind of way. And what this means is that we're not seeing the kind of innovation that we could potentially see. And I do think that some organizations, financial services of all kind, And then we can look beyond financial services and all kinds of organizations. They are beginning to recognize that, gee, actually, it's incredibly powerful to be a platform. And so rather than thinking of ourselves as a narrow vertical institution that does this one type of business, and we have partners to say, actually, let's be a platform where all kinds of interesting things can take place on that platform. That's a very sort of high-level philosophical, what does that mean in practice?
Right.
That's going to vary in context from situation.
I'm sure you get requests for collaborations from institutions, businesses coming to you saying, can I create an API link with,
Not so much.
Not so much? Okay. But what sort of collaborations do you have with businesses?
Not very many. I mean, so with Wikipedia, we have some collaborations with galleries, libraries, archives, museums, so those types of places. So people who have huge public archives of photos,
Knowledge,
for example,
yeah.
that are in the public domain, they're not under copyright, and the institution that is managing them has a public service mission, then many of them are beginning to realize, well, look, if our mission is public service, we need to be on Wikipedia, we need to be partnering with Wikipedia, because that is how the public is accessing culture today.
Right.
So we do have a lot of those kinds of partnerships, but in terms of other, sort of tech partnerships and things like that, it's very minimal.
Right. But where is the technology taking you? Were you on PHP before? Like, you have you're written on, you write on MediaWiki.
Yeah.
Is the coding technology moving away from the server side to the client side?
I mean, a little bit, but for us, we're quite old-fashioned. So the way Wikipedia works, we really strive to make sure that we're accessible. So accessible is really important to us, including accessible on older browsers and things like that. Also, the nature of Wikipedia is the content is largely static, things you come and read. And so that doesn't require a huge front-end interface. It's basically just pages from the server and you read them. The editing interface has become more JavaScript-oriented as we've moved to the visual editor, which is a more sort of modern graphical, more like a word processor than the old-style wiki editing. So there is some of that stuff that's moved to the front end. But in large part, I don't foresee any major shifts in our technology. Now that's talking about the website proper. There's of course also the mobile, so the rise of mobile. So we are investing money in improving our app and being good on that, our mobile website. We now see over 50% of our page views are mobile, and that's really important. It also raises some interesting challenges for us when we think about the growth of Wikipedia in the developing world, where the next billion people are coming online very quickly, but they're coming online on mobile devices, and so they're not necessarily able to contribute to Wikipedia in the same way. It's very hard, even if we do a fantastic job on mobile editing. Obviously, it's a screen this big, and you're typing. It's not
right.
easy. And so we think about that, and we think about well, how do we empower people to do what they can? Maybe they're editing smaller chunks of text. Maybe we make new tools to make that process as good as it can be.
Right.
And so those are the kinds of tech changes that we have to keep.
Right. So when you mentioned platform, right, and that's a phase in itself, which is a platform economy. You've got the Facebooks and so on, and not so much Wikipedia, but your peers, Facebook, Google. There's been a kind of a move towards personalization, increased ownership, and both in terms of security as well as curating it for the person in that way. So as that evolves, do you think that this platform approach is got a lifespan still?
Well, I do, but I think we're probably seeing a little bit of a backlash against that algorithmic curation because it brings in a lot of complicated problems, right? So for Wikipedia, we have very little of that. I know they were showing me on the app there's a little bit of suggesting articles to people based on what other people have read and things like that, and we're looking at that a little bit. But because our objective is not to maximize page views and maximize time on site, because our business model is so different, and that's probably worth pausing for a second to explain what I mean. So for Wikipedia, we're a charity, but even so, we have a business model, so to speak, and that business model is to ask people to donate money to support Wikipedia, in order to get someone to donate, they have to love Wikipedia. They have to say, this is improving my life.
I agree,
right?
yeah.
And it's a meaningful thing to me. If our business model, or if you're Facebook, for example, your business model is total ad impressions, ad page views. So it's about targeting the ads, it's about getting people to stay on the site longer. And for that, then the algorithm is pushing towards keeping you on the site as long as possible, which means that algorithmically showing you tempting things to keep you going is really important. But also, people seem to be having a bit of a backlash against it. There's a sense that what keeps me clicking right now is kind of appealing to my reptilian brain, but my higher mind, that's not how I want to spend my time. I would actually rather be doing something more thoughtful, more reflective. And so we're seeing some backlash that that curation and personalization isn't being done in a way that's healthy for me. It's been done in a way to maximize my time on the site.
So this is very interesting because the Chinese seem to have taken curation to another level, which is it's curated around your entire lifestyle, you know, payments, you know, purchases, bookings, you know, daily, and the Western platforms have consciously avoided that for an entire cycle, and still avoiding it if they can. But I think Facebook, WhatsApp is coming in step by step. Like they're trying to put a payment module to it and so on. Do you think that that this platform model could have been richer if and why was it avoided? Why were the major players so simplistic in their approach?
It's a very good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's a really interesting question, and I think some of the problems that I think we see, which come from pure advertising business model, could be alleviated to some extent if there were other sources of revenue. So, for example, Amazon. Amazon's website is designed with a different goal in mind. The goal of Amazon's website is not to keep me there all day long, addicted every day. If I'm just viewing things on the site, it's useless to them, right? They only make money if they sell me something.
Right.
And so their optimization is around showing me things that I want to buy, which makes sense. It's a store, right? But it's a subtly different thing. And so nobody says, I feel that Amazon is making me depressed in life because I sit on the site for 6 hours a day and I've wasted my time.
Yeah.
They say, wow, Amazon's great because I get on there and I buy and I check out very quickly and then the thing comes the next day and it's wonderful.
Right.
Or they, maybe they're buying more than they should because they're showing them things they want to buy. I know there's all that consumerism thing, but it's just different. And so that's one of the things I find very interesting is to think about some of the surprising impacts where this is your particular business model, but then that drives you in a certain direction that might or might not be where you thought you were going to go.
Right. What is the prospect going to automate a little bit more of your volunteer-driven?
I think we'll see a little bit more AI. I think it's impossible to deny that there have been some great advances, and as processing power gets cheaper, it becomes more feasible to do things. On the other hand, the idea that AIs could write Wikipedia entries, I think, is very far off, 30 years off. That is one of the highest forms of human activity, particularly when you really understand it. If you've not done it, people who aren't, for example, maybe journalists or publishers or writers of some kind, they sometimes don't realize the amount of complexity involved. But once you understand that it isn't just, coughing up some random facts, right? It's actually thinking about what does my reader know? What do they understand? What do I need to explain? What are the most important highlights here? What are the things that I need to include or not include? Now you're talking very high-level cognition that's far beyond any AI that we have today, even as we move into things like driverless cars. But if you really think about the process of driving, you've got machine vision. That's an impressive achievement. But it's basically, here's the car, don't crash into anything, and sort of a bunch of parameters around that. And obviously, it's not easy. I don't mean to demean that work, but it's nothing remotely like writing an original Wikipedia entry, or even more, writing an original news story. So I think we're pretty far away. At the same time, I think there's some really exciting and interesting concepts around the scale of Wikipedia and the kinds of things that might happen. So, for example, machine translation is still pretty terrible, but it's a lot better than it used to be. And it gets to the point where you can now imagine, and we're doing some of this, and it's becoming more popular with the community because finally it starts to be usable. But if we think about a language like Tamil, right, which has over 100,000 entries in Tamil Wikipedia, some of those entries will not be in English Wikipedia. It will be about something local, a local temple, a local politician, and they don't exist in English Wikipedia. So now if we can imagine a machine translation from Tamil into English that won't be perfect, but if it's pretty good and it enables the community to take something and quickly to fix a few small problems, that's an amazing tool for transferring. Now, and the reason I go in that direction is everybody thinks, oh, now you can translate English to Tamil, but I think this is that's too simplistic, right?
Yeah.
And it's also too simplistic because I wouldn't be in favor of that sort of mass translation of, because your reader is different, like their context, what they need is different. The cultural assumptions and biases from English speakers that they haven't thought of certain things.
Yes.
You know? It's all there, and so we need to be a bit more thoughtful about that. But you can also imagine a tool where you've got two, like, let's say I would love this tool. Suppose I could take the Arabic Wikipedia entry on Yasser Arafat and the Hebrew Wikipedia entry on Yasser Arafat, translate them both into English, and then compare them. That's a really interesting nuanced, and I could say, like, but of course right now that translation is such a raw force. It's raw. It's not very good. You can't really understand the nuance. Then the other thing is I like the idea of, with AI of things like, you can easily imagine how if in one place Wikipedia says this person was born in 1934, and then somewhere else says this person was born in 1935, a machine could easily detect that this is a contradiction. But I think we can go even a bit more than that to say, here are two sentences that are in tension with each other. They could be both true, but it's sort of, they don't seem like they are compatible. And a computer cannot understand that, but I think we've got a level now of linguistic analysis and that you could flag that up to a human to say, gee, we seem to be saying something completely different over here. Let's take a second look.
So that brings to the last and most intriguing question, the whole question of fake news, right? Yuval Harari said that if 10,000 people believe a piece of news for 1 week, that's fake news. But if 1 million people believe a piece of fake news for several generations, that becomes a religion. So the nuance versus fake news.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I do think, again, here I think that algorithms can help. Algorithms can spot certain signifiers that something might be fake news. And I'm not talking about anything super sophisticated. Simple thing, if I'm going to share something on Facebook, and if Facebook detects this is a website with only one page on it, it was registered as a domain name a week ago. Yes, it looks like a news site, but a news site with only one article that was registered a week ago, and 7 people have flagged it as fake news. That's enough of a signal to maybe warn me and say, ooh, we have some signals that this might be fake news. You might want to check, before you share it with your friends. And I think that's where algorithms would help, but they can't really decide nuanced things. Donald Trump calls any story he doesn't like fake news, right? But it's nuanced, and sometimes he calls something fake news, which when I look at it and I read it, I say, you know what? He's wrong. It isn't fake news, but it is biased against him. Like, it did misquote him. Like, this wasn't a great story.
Right.
I can see why he's upset about it. A more traditional president would have said, unfortunately, the CNN story missed some of the key elements of my speech and actually portrayed my view incorrectly, and it was biased against me, and here's my explanation. And Trump just goes, fake news.
Yeah. So is that a self-imposed out of bounds for you? Like, that it's the judgment part is something that you would avoid getting into, or you would want to contribute to?
I think we still need humans at that level, because I haven't seen anything all that impressive around algorithms being able to judge what's true and false in the big picture sense, in the place where we're having problems in society.
The interesting thing about the model they've created in Wikipedia is that it's not so much the cloud of the technology, it's the cloud of the community.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I always say, I've said for years, going way back to the early days, that stories about Wikipedia would frequently appear in the technology section of the newspaper, and I always said, this isn't really correct. We should be in the culture section of the newspaper because, yes, we use technology, of course, and Wikipedia would be impossible without the internet and databases and modern technology. But the true story of Wikipedia is a story about people and values. It's about thoughtfulness and kindness and
So when you
working
think
for a
of
better
yourself
world.
as the founder of Wikipedia, what is the self-perception in terms of achievement? Like, wow, I've got this role now. What is that role?
I think my role is quite symbolic. I try to represent the community in that way. I've sometimes joked in the past I'm like the Queen in the UK. No actual power, but I wave at crowds a lot and say certain things. And so I really do think, for me, the most important thing about the whole world of Wikipedia is about the values that we started with and being true to those values of openness, collaboration, of quality, of thoughtfulness, neutrality, really striving to do that and making sure that the community doesn't get overrun by trolls or commercial interests or whatever it might be.
Yeah. Jimmy Wales, thank you so much for sharing with us
thank you.
this whole scope. The interesting thing is that this interview was really meant for institutional people, thinking about their business. And in the way that you've shared your story, there is an institutional angle to it, and there is an opportunity for profit. It's just that what you've done is you've kept the profit element out of the community element, and maybe that's...
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the principles of openness and collaboration apply everywhere, whether you're trying to do a nonprofit encyclopedia or trying to grow a local wine store,
Right.
whatever it might be.